How you doing, people? Welcome back to another ESO video. Today is the Elder Scrolls Online Dragonknight class guide. Yes, I'm going to go over all the skills, all the morphs, the do's, the don'ts, the passives, the ultis, the lot. And at the end of the video, I'm going to go over some class identity kind of boosting sets, a bit more aesthetically pleasing for those of you that like fire and poison and that kind of stuff. So if you want to see more of this, stay tuned. It is all coming up. So if it wasn't already painfully obvious, yes, of course, the Dragonknight is based on dragon stuff, that being poison, fire, and wings. And we do have all that kind of stuff. Now, traditionally, people assume that Dragonknights are best at tanking. No, every class in the game can play every single role. But do they have an effective toolkit for tanking? Yes, of course they do. But equally, their DPS and healing is very, very good if you build for it. So again, any class, any race, any role. You can do whatever you like. Now, first of all, obviously, you want to know how to level the skill lines, because these are obviously at 50 for the purpose of the demonstration, but they start off as 1. So what you need to do is any skill line that you have active or open that you want to progress in, you need a skill from that skill line on your bar. Any experience points that you gain, whether it be writs, kills, quest hand-ins, doesn't matter where the source comes from, as long as it is experience points. If you get experience points with a skill from each skill line on your bar, then you will gain progress towards the leveling up of that skill line. So, of course, if you have a skill there, that skill will level up. It starts off at level 1, it can go to 4, and then you morph it. But, as well, the line itself will progress. So, these will unlock at different checkpoints, and the more XP you gain while slotting one of these from the line, the better. Once you get to 50, you're done, and you can take the skills off if you want and use something else. But if you want to max them out, you need to gain XP. Bear in mind, if you're using 2 bars and you swap bars and you have different skills on the back bar that are not from this skill line, when you gain experience points, these will not progress. So it's very important to note. You don't actually have to actively utilize the skills. You just need to slot them. Anyway, let's get into the details of the skills themselves. So, Ardent Flame, first of all, this is your fiery, poisony skill line. Basically where most of your damage comes from. Not to say everyone's don't have damage in their skill lines, but this is the most predominantly focused on damage skill line that you basically have. So first of all, we've got Lava Whip, which is basically a magical flame whip, and it does damage to single target within 7 meters maximum. So it's melee range. Melee range is 7 meters, by the way, for all sources now. They changed it a while back. If you strike the enemy that is immobilized or stunned at the time, you set them off balance. Now, off balance does have a big benefit to anyone that is in combat with that target. And off balance basically is where you heavy attack the target and you will stun them and knock them over. Unless they're CC immune. Or unless they are a boss. In that case, regardless, during off balance, you will do 70% more damage with a heavy attack. And if you do heavy attack, you'll get double resources back, regardless of whether it's a melee weapon or a magical weapon. Whichever resource you would gain, you get double. Off balance lasts 7 seconds on any target, and after off balance is gone, that target is immune to off balance for 15 seconds. So, you have to utilize that window of opportunity. This skill actually forces it. So again, if it is immobilized or stunned already, you will knock it off balance and the group can benefit. Now, there's 2 different morphs to this. One is Molten Whip. Now this one splits the cost. Instead of costing Magicka up front, it costs Magicka and Stamina. So the same amount of resources, but it's split between the 2 bars, which is very, very tricky. But while slotted, your other Ardent Flame abilities increase the damage of your next Molten Whip cast and weapon and spell damage. So let's simplify this. Basically, every time you use a different Ardent Flame ability that isn't a whip, so it has to be from this skill line but not the whip itself, you will gain 85 weapon and spell damage for 15 seconds. And every time again that you use another Ardent Flame ability, you will reset that timer over and over and over and over. Now, this can stack up to 3 times, and when it gets to 3, it will peak, and then your whip will do 20% more damage. That tooltip probably could have been explained a little better, but that's basically the idea. Stack, 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 use the whip, stack, 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 use the whip. Or just slot the whip and never use it. Because you could maintain 85 times 3 weapon and spell damage indefinitely. Now, bear in mind, of course, that is one version of it. And that is very, very unique. So we'll put that on the bar for the moment. Basically, you do this. There's your whip. It's as simple as that. But if you have other Ardent Flame abilities, I know we're going ahead a little bit here, but we just need to demonstrate it for the purpose of it anyway. So every time you use a different ability, you can see on my buff timers at the bottom there, or my debuff timers, or whatever you want to call it, that little bar there, there are a couple of eyes. And that is a buff for Seething Fury. That's to let you know you've got your weapon and spell damage increase. Every time you use another one, you will see that it will stack them up. And the whip will be stronger. So different, whack it. And that's it. As you can see, the third one actually gave you a backflip. That's the one you're looking for. So if you can stack 3 abilities, then use it. Stack 3 abilities, then use it. That is up to you. It doesn't mean spam the skill I'm showing you. That's just for demonstration purposes. But every third ability will allow you to get that Wicked Whip, and you can do the backflip, and it does more damage. The other morph is completely different. It still does the whip, but it now costs magicka instead of splitting the resources. And targeting an off-balance or immobilized enemy changes the ability into Power Lash, allowing you to effectively half the cost of the skill and heals you. So basically, if you can keep an eye on off balance, well, you can spam this as a spam ball, much like the previous one if you really wanted to. If the target does happen to be off balance, you will do a wicked backflip and you will heal. As you can see at the moment, no heals at all. This target dummy over here comes with off balance. So once I engage with him, you will see on the far left-hand side at the top of his buff and debuff timers, there will be a blue symbol, which looks like somebody's head with stars going around it. That is off balance. You'll notice that this will change to 2 eyes instead of a whip, and now I can do backflips. And if you look at the right-hand side, you can see the green, the numbers, that's me healing. And back to normal. So you can use it as a main spammable, much like Molten Whip is also a spammable, but one rewards you for using it less often. This one rewards you for using it during off balance in order to take advantage of that big heal. Again, if you're backflipping, you're healing. If you're not, then you're not. But that is up to you. Again, 2 different morphs to utilize the skill quite differently, but again, your application is the same. It's single target, 7 meters, do a whip. Now, Searing Strike, you did see this already, but I didn't explain it, obviously. This is a single target damage over time ability. You can only put it on an individual target on an initial cast, but you can put it on multiples if you go from one to another to another to another. It doesn't remove the first one. You can place it on lots of individual ones. But again, this is single target cast. So if you want to put it on 6 targets, you have to put it on 6 different targets, one after the other after the other. It's not an area of effect or anything like that. It's damage over time in the form of flame. It does do a damage up front initially as well, and it lasts for 24 seconds with passives, which is absolutely nuts. And one more major benefit. Enemies that are hit with the initial hit are affected with a guaranteed burning status effect. Burning status effect comes from fire if you're lucky enough to fire it. Yes, I used fire twice in the same sentence. Basically, you have to have high status chance or be lucky in order to have that come from fire damage, and it's a damage over time effect. Short duration, but it hits pretty hard. This comes with it, so you've got 2 dots for the price of 1. Granted, the burning status effect will run out very, very quickly, but it's still very impactful up front, and it's going to be beneficial to our passives later. Now, the 2 morphs are basically applied the same, but they have different results. So this isn't saying poison damage does more than fire, because that is inaccurate. It just depends on the skill and depends on the buffs and bonuses on the target. Technically speaking, all damage types are the same. The only difference is their status effect. But this skill does separate slightly from that because it does have an extra bonus. This turns the skill into poison. It costs stamina now. It guarantees a poison status effect instead of a burning, which again is a damage over time effect of the same type of damage. But the poison seeps into the target and deals increased damage the longer it lasts. This is unique to the skill, not to damage types, because you could have a completely different build with some poison glyphs and some fire glyphs, etc., etc. But this skill does ramp up. So this will do 12% more damage every 2 seconds the longer this runs. So do not spam this. Fire it, forget it. It has to last its full duration if you want the most out of it. And again, poison status effect guaranteed. That does mean that also at every single tick you could apply a further status effect, but initially on cast you guarantee it. So up front, this is very, very strong when it hits first off for the first 6 seconds, because poison status effect lasts 6 seconds. Burning Embers doesn't have the rampant damage. It does do fire damage just like the previous one did. However, over this duration, you will heal for 96% of the amount of damage done with this ability. Bear in mind that 96% is an inaccurate stat. I do have healing done bonuses on this particular character at the moment, so that is going to be different. Also, if you are built for DPS, that flame damage would be different. The stats are slightly irrelevant at this point. However, basically you will heal for a large amount of damage done every tick. Yes, you can make that much, much higher with extra mending bonuses, vitality bonuses, and if you're in the Endless Archive, there's a bonus in there that will enhance that by a further 60%. It gets nuts. So you've got two options. Ramping up damage and cost stamina, or maintain the same damage as the original morph, but you heal for the damage done. Now, as you can see here, you are healing every 2 seconds. It is relatively low on this particular character because he's built to be rather tanky, but if you're built for DPS, that can be very, very impactful. In fact, you can out-heal lots and lots of PvE dots and sometimes even PvP dots if you are in trouble. So bear in mind, the more you build into damage, the stronger that will be per heal, but even if you're a tanky character, that can still be somewhat substantial. It does all add up in the end. So the choice is yours. Fiery Breath. You breathe fire, basically. 2 different morphs. First of all, it starts off as a fire damage, area of effect ability that does direct damage to all targets. But the damage over time counts as single target damage over time. So while it can hit infinite targets, anything that has an extra effect outside of the direct damage it does, which is the initial hit, only affects 6. So this will actually only affect 6 targets initially with the damage over time. As you can see, they are all individually affected with damage over time. It's not on the ground as an area of effect on the ground, and it's not an area of effect ability for that side of the skill. This is, the initial burst is, but the rest of it is single target damage over time. And what I'll do here is I'll get another target dummy to show you the difference. Yes, they're free on the PTS. They're not real crowns. So now we've got 7 target dummies. As you can see here, one of them is not on fire. He is not on fire. Because any skill that is area of effect, regardless of whether it's direct or area of effect damage over time, can hit uncapped amount of targets unless the skill says otherwise, but any debuff or side effect only hits 6. That's important for both morphs. So, morph number 1, Noxus Breath. This converts into a stamina ability and it now does poison damage instead of fire. It still applies the uncapped area of effect burst initially, but it does hit 6 targets with the damage over time individually. They can, of course, if you're lucky, provide poison status effects, but remember, the Venomous skill actually applies it by default, so you can stack the 2. And this applies major breach to those targets as well. So every single target that is affected by this, remember, up to 6, will have their resistances reduced by 5, 9, 4, 8. Now, you could argue that you might have that in your group already with a debuff from a tank taunt, but this hits multiple targets, so it's really, really handy. Especially for solo, and especially for group scenarios. So its utility and damage output is actually really, really handy across the board. However, the other morph is slightly different. This morph is Engulfing Flames, and this now turns it back into a flame ability. It costs Magicka, and it still does the burst AoE and damage over time to 6 targets. Affected enemies, however, take more damage from all flame damage attacks based on your weapon and spell damage with a maximum of 6% bonus damage. So, at the moment, I have a 3% bonus because I'm not really built for damage. But if you are built for weapon and spell damage, you can get that up to 6%, and that's a buff to all fire damage to that target for you and your group. Fiery Grip is next. This is your chain ability. Nice and easy. Put it on your bar, and if you want to control the enemy, you do this, and you pull them to your feet. Granted, they are immune to crowd control, so they won't come to me, but you've got 22 meters worth of yoink, come over here. That is where you place them, and that is how you control things as a tank or as a DPS that wants to control things. It's entirely up to you how you utilize it. But bear in mind, this chain was altered as was every other pull ability recently in the game, and that it will apply a temporary taunt to the target. Now, you could argue the normal taunt is the same amount of time, but instead this is a little different. Chains do not fully hard taunt a target. So when I say hard taunt, there is a video about this where I explain it in more detail, but you could have a puncture or pierce armor, you could have the clench from the frost staff. Those are taunts that can constantly be overwritten by you, by refreshing it, or by someone else taking it from you with an equivalent buff or bonus or debuff or taunt. This particular one cannot be overwritten by itself. That's why I said it's temporary. You pull it, if you pull it again, it won't restart the timer. Any other taunt that is a proper hard taunt will. So this allows you temporary control of that particular individual, and you can overwrite that with a more solid taunt if you choose to, or if it's only going to last 15 seconds in the fight anyway, you've got control of it for now. So if you're a DPS utilizing this, bear in mind you have just grabbed aggro. But since it can't overwrite itself, and it is not more important than an already designed harder taunt, if the tank has this stabbed or clenched or whatever with a proper set in stone harder taunt, you won't get aggro from it. So don't worry. If you can keep an eye on what's going on in the fight and your tank is actively using a designed solid taunt for the purpose of aggro, you will not steal this off them. This cannot steal aggro. It can gain aggro initially if the target isn't aggroed, but it cannot steal it if someone else is in control. Nor can it steal it if the tank chained first. I know that sounds really confusing, but there's a video, it's linked in the description, that will explain absolutely everything you need to know about these types of skills if that is confusing. But essentially, you pull the enemy in and you slow down the movement speed. Anyway, the two morphs. This one pulls you to the enemy instead, and it no longer taunts the enemy, but instead grants major berserk after casting. So if you utilize this, you will go straight to the target and you've got 10% increase to damage done for the next 4 seconds. That is a very utility-based skill with a really big buff for a DK, but it is different. It's going to pull you into the fight and put you in the face of danger. Again, that does not have the taunt attached to it anymore because it's no longer a pull, it's now a gap closer. Unrelenting Grip puts it back to a pull. Again, with the taunt, it still works, but instead of casting it and maybe the target is immune so you wasted your magicka, this one gives you the magicka back. So there's two ways to utilize this. This particular morph, obviously you can still chain stuff to your feet. Great. However, if the target won't move because they're immune or they are a boss, technically, since they won't come to you and you do get all your magicka back if they are immune, you can use this as a free spammable. If you want to know more about that, there's a build on my channel called Burn, and it actually utilizes this to take advantage of 3 Ardent Flame abilities used for free, and then use your Molten Whip. Chain, 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 whip. Chain, 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 whip. It's in the video. Next up, Inferno. This does change completely, depending on the morph. First of all, you activate it, and you have an aura of flames around you, which is quite nice. There you go, you've got a fireball. Brilliant. Now, this will actually trigger once every 5 seconds, dealing flame damage to the nearest target. And while slotted on any bar, you gain Major Prophecy and Savagery, increasing your spell and weapon crit rating by 2629. I know that's confusing, but crit rating is 1% for every 219. Don't know why they're still using digits, but they are. Anyway, that is quite simple. Closest target gets fire on them all the time. Note very carefully, this says while slotted on either bar. So you can maintain Prophecy and Savagery regardless of which bar this is on, even if you slot it on the back and never really activate it. I would activate it because it does damage, but if you don't, you're still going to get the buff. Note, by the way, this Flame Lash, the Molten Whip version, the buff to Siphon Fury actually now carries over bars, so you don't have to have it on the front if you don't want to. You don't have to have it at the back if you don't want to. You can pick which one you put it on. Anyway, back to where we were. Flames of Oblivion now launches 3 fireballs instead of 1. Which is really handy. So 3 different individual targets that are close to you will all take flame direct damage every 5 seconds. Now, technically speaking, the skill lasts 15, so you do want to make it run out for its full duration. But if you were to spam it, which I don't recommend, but if you were to spam it, you could make it fire every second. Anyway, Prophecy and Savagery is still there. Any bar, your choice. Now, Cauterize makes this different. Instead of fireballs firing out every 5 seconds, you heal people every 5 seconds. This will be either you or an ally. So you still get the Savagery, you still get the Prophecy, but instead of doing damage, this actually heals, and the radius is increased. Before it was 15 meters, now it's 28. So instead of being fireballs that fire out in loads of random directions, you have an actual heal instead. So you've got a Healy Orb instead of a Fiery Orb. And again, every 5 seconds, look at my bar, this will heal you. That can be quite dramatic depending on how you build, but bear in mind, heals, unless they say otherwise, are usually scaled off of weapon and spell damage and maximum stamina or magicka. So weapon or spell damage, magicka or stamina, whichever of the two different stats you mix, that is where your strength will come from. Some are based off of max health, this one is not. Now we've got Draconic Power. This is where you feel a bit more chunky. This is your kind of tanky skill line, if you like. Spiked Armor. Release your inner dragon to gain major resolve. Yes, you have a resistance buff. That is quite simple. Every class has their own way of acquiring a resistance buff for major resolve. No, they don't stack with other sources of it, but it's very rare to get it from somebody else, unless, of course, they are a warden or if they're using a particular set. Yes, one does exist. And technically, 2 sets exist, but one is for the group, one is for you. However, when you get hit, you return damage to the target, but they have to be using direct damage. If they are using direct damage in melee range, and it scales off of your physical and spell resistance, by the way, you will do damage back to them. So the tankier you are, the higher resistances, the more damage you do. Again, you don't actually do damage to the targets, they have to hit you first. And if I enhance my resistances, you will see that this is now stronger. So the higher your resistances, the more flame damage you send back. And it's 2 different morphs. This one still sends back damage, but on activation, you get a really big damage shield, depending on how high your health is. So your maximum health decides how strong this shield is. If you're ultra squishy, it's going to be a really small shield. If you're very chunky, it's going to be massive. Also, the other morph, instead of returning damage alone, because it still does it, you actually cause damage. So you fire out spikes, basically. And that does damage over time to all targets caught in it. Again, this lasts 20 seconds, so it's the duration of the entire skill, and it's flame damage, but you also do flame damage for being hit. Now again, that is scaled differently, however. This does damage over time, as you can see. And that is uncapped. That hits all targets. It doesn't have a debuff or modifier to it like the other skills does, so this will hit all targets. Now, while the damage shield is scaled off of maximum resistances, the damage on this is scaled off of your weapon and spell damage. So as a DPS, yes, you can actively use this as a survival skill, but also a close range damage over time in area of effect. It's quite nasty. Essentially, it's a resistance buff, but 2 different ways to utilize it. Okay, now we've got Dark Talons. Now this is quite simple. This goes on here, and this roots enemies. So while you've got a chain that pulls, and that does apply a stun CC, by the way, the CC rules for cooldown, crowd control cooldowns, is where you stun something and then you can't re-stun it again until the timer runs out. Stuns and chains do follow the same rule for that, but immobilization is separate. So you can pull something to you and then instead of letting it run away, pin it. That pin lasts 4 seconds initially, and there are 2 different morphs to this. So first of all, it does flame damage and it immobilizes for 4 seconds, and it does have a really powerful synergy on it where other people can take from you and then blow them up, which is quite nice. But the 2 variants are slightly different. Although they both offer immobilization, one is more for mitigation and the other is for damage. So you've got this variant here, which reduces the cost, and effective enemies have minor maim attached to them, reducing the amount of damage they do. It says for 9 seconds, but it's for 10 when you morph it. Now that obviously cannot immobilize a boss or a target that is immune to immobilization. However, it does still apply the maim. So if you are a tank and you are utilizing this on a boss, you can still apply it for the purpose of the long-durated minor maim during the fight. Burning Talons, however, does damage over time. This will do flame damage over 5 seconds. It is bloody expensive to keep using this over and over and over, but you can make it very, very strong, and it is really useful in short fights or on builds that can utilize it with really high sustainability built in. So the choice is actually yours, but bear in mind again, because it's got minor maim attached to the thing initially, or immobilization, which again is a CC type, this will only actually affect 6 targets. You can see here, this dude is not being affected. Any skill, regardless of its damage type, if it has the ability to hit multiples, if it has a debuff type attached to it, it will only hit 6. That just means if there's more than 6, do it twice. Dragon Blood. This is your major heal. Now, over time, this has gone through several different changes, but at the moment, this is its current state. Basically, 2023, November. If it changes after that, then, well, you know the date. This will basically turn you into this. Wrong button. How about we put it on the bar first, shall we? You can keep that for a free blooper. Tell your friends. Anyway, don't you look cool? You can see your heart all the way through there. It's massive, actually. Anyway, while that is active, you gain Major Fortitude, increasing your health recovery by 30% for 20 seconds. And you also heal for 34% of your missing health on activation. Read that very carefully. 34% of your missing health, which means it's percentage based. So if you have a very, very small health bar, that 34% of whatever's missing is going to be relatively low. If you have a very, very large health bar, that 34% of whatever's missing is going to be fairly large. So the tankier you are, the more effective this is as far as cost is concerned and as far as potency is concerned. So this is what you would generally use if you were a tank, if you were trying to maintain high health during a stressful situation. Again, if you're a squishy DPS and you've got maybe 18 to 20k health, which is incredibly low, then you're probably not going to get much out of this. So you're going to spend 4.5k magicka to fill a very small amount of health, whereas you could just use a different type. But again, that is up to you. How you build is your choice. The 2 morphs, however, do twist that. So this version actually gives you major endurance as well as major fortitude. So now you've got a 30% recovery to stamina and health. Yes, technically you get that from tripods, so they don't stack. But, I mean, obviously they can fill the gap if you have this off. This has to be while active. So if you forget to apply this and you only ever use it as a heal, that is something to consider. You might want to fill the gap. But this also gives you minor vitality, increasing all of the healing you receive. So you can cast a heal at X amount of strength and then receive the stronger version of it due to this buff. So if you maintain this as a 20-second buff and then utilize the heal when you need it, it can be stronger than what it says there. But this also changes based on your maximum health. So this particular version does still give you a big heal based on missing health, but after the cast, it will heal you once a second over 5 seconds. So you've got a hot added to it as well. Again, the more health you have, the stronger this is. This version, however, now heals based on your offensive stats rather than your health and increases the amount of healing based on your missing health. So while this does still work the same way, like the chunk that's missing, it will heal a percentage of it, that is now more, and it scales off of your higher weapon or spell damage and your higher magicka or stamina. So whichever stats you choose to mix, it will scale off of those now instead of health. Bear in mind, it still maintains the health recovery bonus, so that is there, but it doesn't have the healing received bonus. So higher healing received, higher stamina recovery, more health makes it stronger. No stamina recovery, no vitality, higher offensive stats makes it stronger. So how you build is up to you, and obviously it's quite clear which one you should choose depending on how you do build. So that is now an active heal you can take advantage of outside of its basic morph if you were a squishy DPS. Protective scale, very, very simple. This is your flappy wings. If anyone ever says flappy wings, they mean these. Yes, you're a dragon, you have wings. This will actually reduce the amount of damage you take from projectiles. Anything that is direct projectile, you will take far less damage from it. So that is really important to note. That will get dramatically useful inside pin down scenarios, especially in Endless Archive and stuff like that. So, not that anybody would notice, but the character does look a little different now, because it turns out the character I was using didn't have enough skill points or level up to actually continue the video, so I had to change it, and now back here we are. So, now the morphs. This has a bit of a CC bonus, actually. Basically, you are immune to snares and immobilizations. You can't be rooted, and you can't be slowed down if you activate it. Only lasts for 4 seconds, and the skill lasts 6, yes, but you can time that in situations that you need to and get out of trouble quick. Still has the same effect when it reduces damage from projectiles, but also the cost is reduced as you rank this up. Now, the other variant is different. This actually returns fire. So when you are hit with a projectile, you retaliate by launching the fireball at the attacker with flame damage, and this can happen every half a second. So if you've got multiple targets hitting you, you will send off fireballs in loads of random directions. Bear in mind, this is scaled off of your damage stats. So the other character you saw a few moments ago before that hiccup was actually built to be quite tanky. This one's kind of in the middle, so the stats are going to look a little different depending on how you build. This one's got a bit more flat stats, I guess, so it looks a bit better, but how you build is up to you. Regardless, the effect will still happen. It just depends on how you scale your stats. Inhale is incredibly important and unfortunately quite underused. So, first of all, you basically draw air from around you and do flame damage to nearby enemies, healing you for 100% of the damage caused. After, you will exhale with fire and do fire damage to nearby enemies. It basically looks like this. We'll go near the target so we can actually utilize it. Bang. Draw power from them and heal. Bang, explode. Brilliant. Nice and easy to use. Not really much to explain there. But there are 2 different morphs. It is very expensive, so be careful. Draw Essence. Initial hits heal for more, so the heal is much larger. And the final explosion returns magicka for every enemy hit. So if you end up hitting up to 10 enemies, it costs you nothing. So that's really nuts, and a massive, massive heal. It's almost like the Sap Essence on the Nightblade, except actually stronger. However, this one is a lifesaver. This will actually interrupt enemies that are casting, and the final explosion damage is increased. So this one has a higher heal, and you can get resources back. This one does more damage, and you can interrupt. So yes, you can do this in a crowd, and basically you just did an area of effect bash. So instead of having to do this, and this, and this, and nuke your stamina, oh my god, I can't interrupt. He's through the target, I can't reach him, I can't bash that dude at the back. Do this. All done. Solid skill, especially for those of you, big tip here, in the Endless Archive. So next is Stonefist in the Earthen Heart skill line. Basically, you deal physical damage to all enemies within a 6-meter radius, and basically this will stay with you. This buff will be with you for 12 seconds. Now, the buff that you gain from this is quite simple. You basically have the ability to continuously deal damage in single target to the same enemy, and the final one will stun them. So you start off by doing this. It'll stomp on the ground, and you've got 3 orbs around you. I know the tooltip is confusing, that's why we demonstrate. Now, when that runs out, those 3 orbs will go away. But during the period that they are present, which is the 12-second duration, after the stomp, you will be able to use it as a single target hit. The third one will stun the target. Quite simple, but that's how it works. Now, the morphs are different. So, let me get out of combat first. Reset the skellies. This one is Obsidian Shield. It converts it to a magical ability, and now it heals you or 2 allies after dealing damage. The damage dealt is significantly less, but no longer requires charges to cast it. So you don't have to stomp, build, and then utilize the bonus. You just keep hitting, and every time you do, it will heal people. So you have to do damage in order to heal. The other morph, however, is Stone Giant. You still apply it exactly the same. It still does what it did before, but each hit staggers the target. Now, it doesn't mean it makes them off balance and wobbly and stuff. It's just an effect name. But that target now takes increased damage per stack. Quite simple. Lots of people use that as a debuff to increase damage of the entire group. Other people like to just use it as spammable. Molten Weapons is very simple. You activate it, you get Major Brutality and Sorcery, increasing your weapon and spell damage by 20% for 36 seconds. Bear in mind, this is not just you, this is your grouped allies. So they must be in a group with you, and it's a 28-meter radius. You provide Brutality and Sorcery to the whole group. So nobody needs to use pots or any specific skills that do that for them. Igneous Weapons increases the duration and the radius. So the duration now goes up to 72 seconds, and the radius is now 36 meters instead of 28. So very long duration. However, Molten Armaments still does the same as the initial. You will have to cast it once every 36 seconds to maintain it, but you now gain in power for the duration, so your heavy attacks against enemies are 70% stronger. That means for all PvE enemies, not PvP. So as long as you can maintain this once every 36 seconds, you basically keep the group buffed and you hit harder. Obsidian Shield is very simple. It's a damage shield for you and your group, up to 6 people, and the shield scales off of your maximum health. Bear in mind, the initial one still does that, but this one gets a little stronger. So the first one, damage shield for you and your group, scaled off of health, gives you major mending, massive heals if you maintain that buff. Igneous gives you 2 different types of shield. One for the group and one for you. So all for the group, one for the group, one for you. Your shield is bigger, but both are scaled off of your maximum health. Both morphs do have the same application. Both morphs do shield the entire group, but they are slightly different in the way that they benefit you. This one will give the user a much, much larger shield, while this one will actually increase the duration of Major Mending. So activating this skill will allow you to do 16% increased heals to you and your group while this buff is present. Now what you're looking for here on the buff timers is the shield itself, as you can see on the far end there, on the right hand side. Next to it is Major Mending. As long as you maintain that, your heals are going to be massive. That does apply to any build, DPS, tank, or healer, but obviously healers are going to want to utilize that if you are healing DK. Unless you want to take advantage of a heavy attack from a resto, in which case that's up to you. Petrify is quite simple. Encase the enemy in molten rock, stunning them for 3 seconds, and when the stun ends, they take flame damage. Cannot be blocked or dodged. So if you want to pin someone really quick, hit them with this. It's expensive, but it does guarantee a stun. 2 morphs. Immobilize the enemy after the stun ends. So if they break free, then take damage, and like, yay, I'm out of it. No, you're pinned. So stun and immobilize, which is quite nasty. Again, cannot be blocked. When the stun ends, you are also healed. So you encase the enemy, stunning them to start with, and then when the stun ends, they take flame damage and you heal. So that is a CC ability with 2 different effects. One, immobilizes them afterwards, further crippling the movement speed basically because they're stuffed. And the other keeps you alive for stunning targets. So if you were to stun multiple targets, one after the other, you get a heal one after the other. Tactics are up to you, but it's a cool skill regardless. This skill has 2 different variants that completely flip it on its axis. This summons a cloud of ash onto the ground for 18 seconds and drains magic every 1 second to basically forfeit the cost. Instead of it being an initial cast, it is constantly draining from you, which is quite easy to maintain depending on your magical recovery. Just be careful of your other skills. It will snare the enemies in their location, and it will heal you and your allies per second. So it's a ground heal. And this one heals more. So that was easy to understand. However, you take Eruption, it's no longer a healing skill. Instead, it does damage in the form of flame damage every 1 second to all enemies caught inside of it. And the initial cast does do flame damage immediately, and it does apply a snare. Bear in mind, however, you cannot spam this, because if you did, you wouldn't take advantage of the initial burst. That has a 10-second cooldown. So if you try to be smart and cast this too soon over its initial activation, you won't get that burst. So if you want to apply it every 10 seconds, there's nothing wrong with that. You can, of course, do that, but that takes some micromanaging. And it won't cost you any extra because it takes per second, but you can't spam it initially. So if you want to take advantage of the full duration, you can, but if you want to cast it every 10, then also that will help. But bear in mind, if you're inside global cooldowns of other skills, that will lessen your DPS from other potential spammables. So again, the choice is yours. This also has reduction to cost. So the damage variant costs much less. Oh, you want to see what that looks like, don't you? I couldn't show you petrify because we don't actually have any targets to stun, but it basically puts them encased in rocks. And that is what the fire looks like. Both variants look relatively similar. You're looking for this splash to start with. If that is the healing version and you are outside of the group, you want to get into it to heal. So if the DK in your group is casting this, you want to get into it. If it's a damage version and you are against it, you want to get out of it. Now, we've got 3 major ultimates, and these are all extremely different from each other, so pay attention. Dragonknight Standard, very simple. This goes down on the ground, big banner, and it does flame damage to all targets inside of it every 1 second for 20 seconds. It's an expensive ultimate, but it also applies Major Defile, reducing their healing received and health recovery, so it's a big healing debuff. At the same time, it does have a synergy attached to it, so other people in your group can take advantage of it and literally chain and pin and immobilize targets around this banner for 5 seconds. The damage from that can be quite substantial depending on how they are built. The 2 morphs. Shifting Standard. You can move it. So once you've dropped this, it will last 29 seconds, but during the timer, as long as the timer is still there, you can replace it in another location. Activating it again allows you to move the standard to wherever you want. So all you have to do is press the ultimate button again. So if you press it twice in a row, obviously you're just going to double drop the standard in the same spot. But if you place it in one place, move to another, you can place it again. The purpose of that is for moving the debuff or moving the fire damage. The other variant, however, is quite nasty. Standing in the standard increases your damage done and reduces your damage taken. So you have 15% increased damage done and 15% reduction to all damage that you take. And yes, you can use this from range. If you drop a banner on your feet and you fire at people outside the banner, you are standing in the buff to hit them harder. If they are in the banner, they take fire damage. If you are in the banner, you do more damage. So don't worry if you cast this way out in the open somewhere and the enemy moves away. Because while I can do light attacks from here, I can drop the banner here if I can't reach them and still increase my damage on those. So ideally, of course, you want to drop it in the pack, but if you are in a situation where you really can't do anything else and you have to drop it out in the open, as long as you're standing in it, all of your damage is improved. Now, next up is Draconic Power. We've got Dragon Leap. This is one of my favorite skills in the entire game, and we need one of these ulti thingies so we can actually demonstrate it. So basically, you're Batman. Whenever you hear me say Batman on the DK, I'm talking about this. You launch yourself across the battlefield, 22 meters in fact, it's a gap closer, and all enemies in the area get knocked down or knocked back by 4 meters and stunned. It's physical damage initially, it's very cheap ulti. But if you morph it, you can change it. Still a gap closer, but this reduces the cost and increases the damage and range. This will do physical damage to all enemies, knock them all back, and stun them. Now bear in mind, most gap closers are 22 meters. This is 28. It's massive. The other variant, however, deals flame damage instead of physical, and after leaping, you gain a damage shield. Now, this damage shield can be huge. Currently, it's 37k. That scales off of your maximum health. So if you have a very, very large health bar, that's an incredibly strong shield. You are really hard to kill after you jump into a crowd. So it's basically a scatter skill. Jump in and just knock them all over. I am going to demonstrate it, obviously, because this is one of my favorite skills. Don't use it in situations where you're trying to control the enemy because this scatters them. But if they are all immune, who cares? Yeah, that was epic. Now, next ultimate is our defensive ultimate, which is incredibly powerful if you can time it in the right situations. Magma Armour. This will basically give you a 12-second bonus to damage mitigation. You limit every single attack, no matter how hard they are, to only taking a maximum of 3% of your health. If you get hit by lots and lots and lots of rapid attacks, obviously you can still deplete your health quite quickly, but the big hits will not wreck you anymore. That can be placed on a healer, a DPS, or a tank. Lots of tanks like to use it because of the morph benefits from it. Again, you can use this as any build, but the morphs do make a difference. You will also do flame damage to nearby enemies, and this, again, will last 12 seconds. But these are the two differences. The corrosive armor variant still gives you that protection, but it does poison damage and area of effect instead of fire. And while active, your direct attacks ignore physical and spell resistance, but you can't generate ultimate. So you apply it, you get no ulti regen, and you melt through enemies' resistances if the damage type you are applying is direct. Now, if you have this version, you still have the same benefits as before, you still do flame damage, but when activated, nearby allies gain a damage shield for 100% of their maximum health. This includes you. So if you are a squishy DPS with 20k health, you get a 20k damage shield. If you are a chunky tank with 60k health, you get a 60k damage shield. So this is mad. And also your allies, if they have lots of health, big shield. If they don't have lots of health, still full health bar. And this looks like this. No, it doesn't. We need ulti. It's a long day, people. It's a long day. Ta-da! Not on the bar. We are going to keep that in there because bloopers don't always come through the videos. That is what you look like. So in PvE, that's brilliant. Really nice. We know what you're doing. In PvP, if you see someone looking like this, stop hitting them. You're wasting your time. Wait until it runs out. Spoiler, 12 seconds. Anyway, let's get into the passives, and then we'll go over some of the class identity-based sets. You may have already seen a spoiler. Let's not get to that part just yet. So, this increases your damage from burning and poison status effects. Yes, as a Dragon Knight, you can hit really, really hard with fire and poison status effects. They are both damage over time effects. They are both stronger on this class. When you apply a burning status effect, you restore 1,000 magicka. When you apply a poison status effect, you apply or restore 1,000 stamina. This can happen once every 3 seconds for each individual type of status. Bear in mind, Searing Strike applies burning. Venomous Claw applies poison. If you apply one or the other, you will get stamina or magicka on cast because it automatically applies it. Now, if you've got lots and lots of different sources of fire and poison, they can constantly proc, which means you've got a higher uptime on burning and poison, which means you constantly get resources back. So, playing towards your strengths makes sense on a DK if you utilize poison and fire. When you deal direct damage with an Ardent Flame ability, you reduce the movement speed of the target by for 3 seconds by 30%. Pretty much all of these have direct application. Even the damage over time effects do have a direct hit initially, so when you apply any of the skills, that will work. Increases the damage over time with Fiery Breath, Searing Strike, and Dragonknight Standard abilities by 25% and the duration by 4. Get that as soon as possible. Your main bread and butter skills and your strongest ultimate all get boosted. So get that as soon as possible. Increases your damage of your flame and poison attacks by 5%. Much like the Sorcerer is stronger with physical and lightning, the Dragon Knight is stronger than anybody else with flame or poison attacks at base. Draconic power, very simple. Increases the amount of damage you can block by 10%. You don't need any skill slotted, you just need that bonus. So you're quite tanky. While a Draconic power ability is active, your healing received is increased by 12%. Yes, that does stack with Minor Vitality that comes with Dragon Blood. So if you have this particular buff active, you have Minor Vitality for that 8% increase to healing received. And because it is active, you get a further 12%. Any of these skills that have a duration that are currently active will give you this bonus. Also, the more of these skills on your bar, the higher your health recovery. Bear in mind, if you're a vampire, this is irrelevant, but each one of these skills slotted will improve that. So just to demonstrate, if we put all of them on the front bar, because we can, that health recovery gets mental. As you can see, 1,548 health recovery for slotting all the skills. 258 for each one. Take it or leave it, but that affects your build. Increases your physical and spell resistance. Don't have to have any skills slotted. Done. So technically, that one is for activating, that one's for slotting. These two are for being a Dragon Knight. Earthen Heart is quite important. Even if you're not really utilizing any of these skills, some of the passives are important regardless, especially one big one for the DK for your sustainability and survival. This increases the duration of your Earthen Heart abilities by 20%. All of them now last longer, including this, because it starts at 10. We're going to come back to that. When you cast an Earthen Heart ability, you and your group gain Minor Brutality for 20 seconds, increasing their weapon damage by 10%, And if you're in combat, you also generate 3 ultimate once every 6 seconds for each time you cast a skill within that timer. So if you cast one skill of this skill line at least once every 6 seconds, you will generate ulti. The brutality bonus is insane and so easy to maintain, especially if you're just casting igneous shields every so often, or fragmented shield, whichever morph you take, or using stone giant, or whatever it is you're doing, you will constantly maintain that buff for your group. And if you were using eruption in either morph, it's 18 seconds long. You're going to recast that. It's going to line up with a timer. It's really easy to maintain. Helping Hands was changed over time, but lucky for you, we're here with the changes. When you cast an Earthen Heart ability, you restore 1,120 stamina. This effect doesn't have a cooldown, but you can activate it only when you are not using a stamina costing ability, or if the resource cost is less than the value that you get back. So let me explain that very clearly. Stone Giant is stamina. That doesn't restore stamina. It doesn't count. As you can see here, this effect cannot activate when using a stamina costing ability. Now, Eruption doesn't cost stamina, but it costs less per tick than the amount of stamina you get back. So this one also doesn't apply. Anything else? Free game. Or the magical version of this. Easy peasy. Now the tricky one. Choices, people. Which ultimate should you use? When you cast an ultimate ability, you restore 50 health, 50 magicka, and 50 stamina for each ultimate point spent. The more expensive the ultimate, the more resources you get back. But if you have a small emergency ultimate, you could utilize that in trouble situations where you really, really need a heal and you really need resources. Here's the trick, however. Do not fire an ultimate when you are full resources unless you really have to. If you burn through loads and loads of skills and burn through loads and loads of resources, drop an ultimate and then you get it back and then you can start burning again. But if you just drop it straight away with full bars and then you start burning, inevitably, obviously, you're going to start going lower and lower and lower and lower in resources. You're going to start to struggle. So utilize this inside your rotation. If you're a DPS or a healer or a tank or whatever, yes, of course, you can use it in emergencies, but if you want to make smart use of this, especially for your resource sustainabilities, use resources first, then activate the ulti to get them back. That, in a nutshell, is the DK, people. Very, very chunky, lots of nice tanky bonuses, lots of fire and poison, and some very unusual yet very effective ways to heal. Now, we're going to go over some class identity boosting sets, basically. These are the ones that would basically make you feel a bit more dragony. So, obviously, some of you may be able to point this out. You may have seen it already, but there is a new class set in the game. We can't get any more class identity based than one that only belongs on the class. There are over 600 sets in the game, roughly. Maybe just under, I'm not sure. There's a lot. And there is no restriction to any of them. You can play any class, any role, any gear set, it's up to you. But this is new and only for the Dragonknight. This is the Basalt Blooded Warrior, and basically it has magical recovery, maximum health, and weapon and spell damage. Which is quite nice, obviously, because now you can actually take advantage of 3 different stats, depending on what your class or role is even, you benefit regardless. Unless, of course, you want a stamina recovery, in which case that's out the window. But those stats look relatively low because it's only going to try and level up a level 1 version. Don't worry, that is much, much higher. In fact, those spell damage bonuses go up to 129, not 12. So it looks weak, but it's not. Casting an Earthen Heart ability grants you Rock Stance for 10 seconds. So that's a buff. While you have that, on your primary weapon, so your front bar, you gain Molten Stance, gaining you Major Heroism, generating 3 ultimate once every 1.5 seconds. So every 1.5 seconds, 3 ulti, 3 ulti, 3 ulti, 3 ulti. Remember, your Earthen Heart skill line actually generates ultimate, and you utilize ultimate to get resources back. So you are building rapidly, and you have some of the most expensive ultimates in the game. 200, 250, they're not messing around. Not quite as expensive as the Necromancer, but they're still high. Now, when you are on your secondary weapon, so when you swap bars, you gain Obsidian Stance, increasing your healing done and damage shields. So your healing received, your healing bonuses that you have all stack up already, and now they get even stronger. Imagine having massive, massive health bonuses and increasing your damage shields because of that, and then also further boosting those damage shields because of this, including your Magma Armour, by the way, and your Take Flight if you were using the damage shield morph. They all benefit. Here's a quick tip, by the way. This says front bar, back bar, primary weapon, secondary weapon. Here's the trick. How about you set your character up so that your primary skills and weapons that you want to use are actually on your second, and your secondary weapons that you want to use are actually on your first. The only thing telling you what's front and back is primary and secondary. The order which you are currently on is irrelevant. So you could utilize this on purpose to manipulate the ultimate flip of that and have really big healing on what you would now call your front bar. Now I'm going to explain this very, very quickly. So as you can see here, that was a controller getting loose, don't worry. There's the front one. Again, this is not necessarily a setup. This is just random crap put on here. That is your main hand weapon. That is your backup. As you can see on the skills as well, this is your primary. This is your secondary. This is your backup. What about if you put all your primary wanting to use skills on here and just called this primary for you mentally? That would be where your healing and damage shields are. You could put your taunts here if you were a tank. You could put your damage shields. You could put all sorts. And then on the back bar, which is realistically the front, that's when you get your ulti regen, and vice versa. So it is very clear that whichever bar you are on, it will give you a benefit for, but you can manipulate that and make it work in your favor. Yes, that is done on purpose. Yes, they expect you to do that, but it's very, very cool. All you have to do is cast an Earthen Heart ability to activate the set. Doesn't matter whether it's on front bar or back bar. What matters is which bar you are on. It's a very, very clever twist to how things generally work. Now let's go over some damagey stuff. We are obviously going to go over some of these. So you've got, where have you gone? Bolts of Madness. Here, Groftar. You deal damage. You have a big fire ring around you. What's not to like? You are a Dragonknight. You do fiery stuff. You now have a circle of fire. Also, we've got the DLC dungeon for monster sets. You've got Zahn, which is from Scalecaller Peak. You do light attacks, and you basically crit, if you're lucky enough to do so, and you have a big fire beam. Bear in mind, that fire beam can actually cross paths with other enemies, and they can get caught in it. If they do get caught in it, they will take damage. And anyone caught in this will every single tick take burn and status effect damage. They will apply the effect to them. Every 3 seconds, if we apply a burn and status effect, we will get Magicka back. So that means you are guaranteed Magicka back during this channel. Very handy indeed. This is going to be one of my favorite sets, I'm afraid. But you've got the base game overland stuff, which is in Ebonheart. And you go to Deshaan. You've got one... No, that's not Deshaan. It's in Stonefalls. You've got Red Mountain. This is a medium set. But again, you can put it on your jewelry and weapons if you want. But basically, if you do damage, you will make a small eruption in the ground and a big fireball will fire out. More fiery stuff. Great. We could be here for a long time going over all the fire and poison stuff. Ignore that sound. Ignore the man behind the green curtain. But we would be stupid to miss these opportunities. There are so many. And one of my favorites, I'd get screamed at if I didn't mention it. Vulcan Scoria. You have lots of damage over time, do damage over time, and a meteor flies out the sky. If you're on console, by the way, this is probably one of the weirdest, most satisfying sets in the game, because you know that the meteor is coming out of the sky because your control starts shaking. True story. Don't judge. It's funny. Sunderflame, heavy attacker target. They're on fire. Ember Shield, heavy attacker target. You now get resistances and you set fire to everyone around you. Burn and Spellweave, do damage, have a burn and status effect, get more weapon and spell damage. You see where we're going with this. This can go nuts. There's so much stuff. Now, when we go on to the healing stuff, you've got lots of obvious healing sets, but if we go to the DLC zones, we've got a really old school one here from the first, what we would call chapter, I guess, from many moons ago. But when you cast a damage shield, aka Igneous Shields, you call down a fragment of Trinimac, and you heal your group members. They damage enemies around them as well when this lands, but it also heals people. So for doing your job as healing, damage shield first, heal after, you can heal your group some more. Now, there's lots and lots of different ways to build as a Dragonknight. There are billions of possibilities in this game. We couldn't possibly go over all of them, but those are some of the fun class identity based type sets that make you feel more in tune, if you like, with your particular class. Lots of fire and damage shields and poison and such. There are poison sets, but okay, we'll go over one. We'll go into, I've got to remember where this is now. It is, I'm sure it's in Western Skyrim, actually. Venomous Smite. Here we go. One poison set for you. Dealing critical damage, makes poison surround the target, and yes, if it moves, it stays with it, and every 2 seconds you do damage. It's actually pretty strong. Anyway, again, like I said, we could be here for a very, very long time, but hopefully that was enough to give you some idea of where you could go with your builds, and hopefully the skill and passive section was enough to make you understand how this can work. There's lots of ways to build. There's no set in stone right or wrong outside of how the skills do actually function. So if you check the top left hand side, you will see my main character, the Toxicity build. If you check the top right hand side, you will see one of the world's most popular tank builds and the first build ever on the channel, the Almost Immortal Warrior. And if you check the two down below, there is Murder of Fire and, of course, Hot Sauce, the 1-bar mag DK. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.